Thank you. Good morning. My name is Vanessa Cajina, and as Reshma said, I'm the statewide policy analyst for the California Immigrant Policy Center. My job bases me in Sacramento among the rough and tumble of the state legislature and all the fun bills and budget work that comes along with it. So, as a lot of us have heard in the news for the past maybe year and a half now, there has been an unprecedented budget deficit in California. It's structurally based. There are a lot of political and ideological fights going on within this budget context. And Cynthia Carmona just talked about what the trigger is, and that the state treasurer and the director of the Department of Finance had until April 1st to see if we're going to get $10 billion from the federal stimulus package. They held a press conference this morning indicating that they did not find $10 billion. So we are looking at these trigger cuts going into effect. The treasurer apparently also indicated this morning that the legislature should take another look at the reduction of optional benefits. So we're hoping that there at least will be public hearing on that, and that maybe we will be saved from that cut once again. So we just wanted to give you the latest breaking news on that before we go into some of the other legislation for this year. So the California Immigrant Policy Center, as Reshma said, was founded about 10 years ago in response to very much the Welfare Reform Act around 1996. So historically, a lot of our work has been based on health and social services advocacy. A lot of the programs that we rely on include the CAPI program, the CFAP program, Medi-Cal, and Healthy Families. But for the past few years, we've also found ourselves drawn into a lot of other anti-immigrant pieces of legislation, language access, and basic immigrant rights. There are things that we can do at the state level. There are things that people attempt to do to us at the state level. So with that, I wanted to talk to you about a few bills that we have of interest this morning. The first bill is what we call one of our anti-immigrant bills. And what happens is that every year it seems like there's legislation introduced either through criminal justice or public safety that attempts to demonize immigrants. And the first bill that I wanted to talk to you about in this category is AB 454 by Assemblyman Steve Knight. And what this bill attempts to do is rescind AB 540. Some of you might know AB 540 was legislation passed in 2001 by Assemblyman Marco Firebaugh, and this bill opened up in-state tuition for students who had gone to a California high school for at least 3 years and graduated from that California high school. This was done generally as an attempt to get students without legal permanent residency or without permanent residency or citizenship status into higher education systems that they worked so hard to get into. The other population that this brought in were actually students who were from California but went to college out of state and came back to do their master's or their PhD. So the unintended consequence of this is actually getting all of those students out of paying in-state tuition for a state that they are from. But really what this is an attempt to demonize students who, through no fault of their own, found themselves in a situation and have superseded all of the odds. This bill will be up in Policy Committee this coming Tuesday, March 31st. If you'd like a copy of our letter of opposition, please do let me know and I can send that to you so you can pass that along to your networks. I will be testifying on behalf of the California Immigrant Policy Center against that bill. A bill that we will be supporting this year is on language access. This is AB 611 by Assemblyman Paul Fong. And what this bill does is it requires local governments and the California Secretary of Emergency Management to take into account the needs of limited English proficient communities when responding to disasters. As a lot of us have seen in the past, particularly with the San Diego County wildfires, there was absolutely no attention given to those with limited English proficiency. So when announcements are going on the radio or on the television, or if you have emergency management officials coming through your neighborhood making announcements, there's absolutely no regard given to the language that people spoke. California is home to the most linguistically diverse coalition of people in the nation. And when we have at least a fifth of Californians who speak a language other than English in the home, we realize that it's time that we absolutely have to do something, particularly when it's something so important like emergency management, where you have to evacuate your home, where you don't necessarily know where the evacuation stations are, things of that nature. So we'll be supporting that bill this year. Two other bills that we're supporting this year are based in the healthcare arena. They are AB 513 and 514, which are companion legislation by our ally from this morning, Assemblyman Kevin De Leon. And what these bills do is, number one, they require healthcare service plans and health insurers that offer maternity care, and this includes Medi-Cal managed care. They require those health plans to offer lactation consultation and breast pumps to new mothers who have chosen to breastfeed. Then AB 514, what that does is it creates the integrity for workplaces to offer a 20-minute rest period for nursing mothers every 4 hours. Low-income women in the workplace are the least likely to continue breastfeeding their children, and a lot of immigrant women are within this category. So we see these as huge step forwards, particularly when we look at the Latino community, which does have a higher propensity for obesity and overweight than other communities. Breastfeeding is the first and most important preventive measure against obesity. So we're supporting those two bills. Onto the immigrant rights arena, we have two bills that we're supporting this year. The first is AB 811 by Assemblyman John Perez from the LA area here. And this was actually a bill that was developed by the Assemblyman himself when he found himself walking down the street in his district and was approached by two solicitors asking him if he wanted an ID card. And what it turns out that it was is that they were from a check cashing store in the area, and they were selling their own identification cards. They didn't know that he was an assemblyman. So he wound up doing his own investigations and found out that there was significant unregulation of identification done through check cashing stores. So what this bill does is says that check cashing stores can't issue any identification except for the one offered by the store to get the services, and that you can't charge more than $10 for that identification card. So for a lot of our community, 300,000 households in Los Angeles don't have banking accounts. And we find that particularly immigrants who don't have access to or are intimidated by traditional financial services are getting ripped off by a lot of these folks. So we see this bill as a significant step forward for our community. And the last bill that I wanted to talk about today is AB 1288 by Assemblyman Paul Fong, who represents part of Silicon Valley. And what this bill would do is prohibit cities and counties from requiring that employers in their jurisdiction or employers with whom they contract use the E-Verify program. We have seen in different states and within different cities in California now a growing number of local governments who are taking immigration control into their own hands and saying that if you're an employer in their district or if they're going to contract with you for building, for catering, for any number of services, that you have to use the E-Verify program. The National Chamber of Commerce has at the congressional level taken a big step against this, saying that E-Verify is a cumbersome system and employers have to do a significant amount of training to get their human resources staff ready for it. But the other problem that we've seen is that what E-Verify is a marriage of the Social Security database and the Department of Homeland Security database. And for a lot of us who have either become naturalized citizens or changed our names through marriage, the Social Security Administration isn't caught up to date on that yet. So what you have is about a 10% error rate for eligible workers in the United States who are naturalized citizens. So the California Immigrant Policy Center, while we're not the sponsors of this, do see this as a priority issue this year because we need to keep our people working, we need to keep our people moving, and we can't see immigration control happening at the local level. So with that, I wanted to open it up to questions for maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
You're saying that the check cashing store...
Findings from the Assemblyman and his office and the research that they did on it is that check cashing stores were producing identification cards that they were trying to pass off as being valid.
Like a California ID, or?
They can't produce something called a California ID, but the indication was, particularly with isolated linguistic communities, that they were under the impression that that was a valid form of identification.